Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beastly Talks. I'm your host, Ian Helling, and today I'm here all by myself, and we are going to continue digging a little bit deeper into aggression. So in last week's episode, we talked a lot about what the purpose of aggression is, and today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into how aggression works and why it can be quite a persistent behavior to get rid of in very many cases. Now, as always, and whenever I do an aggression session, I'm always going to bring this up at the start of the session. If you're having issues with aggression in your dog, please get help. Right? This stuff can be quite tricky. It can be quite complicated to work through, and it can be quite dangerous. So make sure you find yourself a balance trainer local to you that has a good reputation, that has a proven track record of knowing how to actually manipulate the dog's behavior to combat anxiety, fear, whatever the root cause for the aggression may be, and that can actually keep everyone safe along the way. This is super important. Don't just listen to what I say and go out there and try your best yourself, because chances are things can go wrong. Well, that being said, let's get stuck into it. So I want to talk about the actual operancy of aggression when it comes to dogs, and why so much aggression just sticks around and doesn't go away, right? Because that's what a lot of people say to me. They're like, hey, we've had this, aggressive, reactive issue with our dog, and it keeps growing. Like, it keeps getting worse. It keeps happening in more situations. It tends to become more intense over time. And people just can't seem to wrap their heads around why the aggression persists. And the reason for that is as simple as the dog is getting something out of it. The dog is having a reinforcing moment from the aggression, and that is actually what's fueling the operancy of the dog's mindset when it comes to being reactive or aggressive, whatever it may be. So operancy, by definition, is the quality or state of being operant. And being operant essentially just means you are utilizing voluntary behavior in order to try and achieve a goal, or a voluntary behavior that you've had some form of consequence for that has been pleasant in the past. So very basically, you're actively using a known behavior in order to provide an outcome that is beneficial to you. Now, dogs are what I like to call environmental manipulators. So the primary purpose of most behavior is to actually try and create an outcome around the dog, to change its environment in any way, form, or shape that is beneficial to the dog. So I want to tell a quick story about my missus's old dog. His name was Sack. He was a cattle dog cross Ridgeback, and he was a great dog. He was a fantastic dog. He was happy with other dogs. He loved people. He was just an incredibly chill, cool little dude. Now, but Zach was also a little bit lazy. And this is where the fun part of the story comes in. So he loved balls, but he wasn't a huge fan of running too far after them. So he loved the game of fetch, essentially. But he didn't quite have the desire to do the long run in order to continue the game on. So what he learned was actually when they were in the park with the tennis ball, his owner would then throw the ball and a bunch of other dogs would run after it. So this was like a big off-leash area for dogs. And a lot of dogs would run after the ball, and one dog would grab the ball and would start retrieving the ball. Now, when they got to about 3 or 4 meters away from Zach's owner, he would stand up and he would bark in their face really loud. This dog had a hell of a bark on him, but he would bark really loud in their face. And they would just reactively spit out the ball. They would kind of just freak out and spit out the ball. Now, at this point, Zach, very pleased with himself, would walk straight over, pick up the ball, return it to his owner in order for the cycle to continue. So he was actively using a form of low-level aggression in order to manipulate the environment around him. So he didn't have to work too hard, but the game continued onwards. And that, I think, is an excellent example of how dogs will become environmental manipulators through their behaviors. Now, I'll give you more examples as we get deeper into the podcast on how the act of operant behavior is actively created by dogs to try and change the environment around them. But there's a couple of things we need to understand before we kind of dig really deep into all of this. And I want to talk about what is referred to as behavioral drive. So behavioral drive is broken down as an internal or external force which is motivating an individual to act stemming from needs. So it's essentially pressure either from within the being or from without or from the outside of the being that is driving them into a behavioral change to get some form of need fulfilled. Now, it's further broken down into four different categories of behavior. So we have the first one, which is biological drive. And the biological drive, that is the very essence of survival. It is food, water, it's reproductive rights. Yeah. So the biological drive is what drives the dog to essentially consume and reproduce. We then have a psychological drive. Now, I should have said before I started this, a lot of this is directed more towards people, but I think it works really well for dogs as well. So I've changed some of the definitions a little bit just to fit with dogs better. But in the psychological drive, we are talking about hierarchy, status, and primarily safety. So one of the most important things for any living, thinking, feeling being is to be safe. If you're not feeling safe, then nothing else really matters at the end of the day. And so that's the psychological side of things. So now we've taken care of the body, we've taken care of the mind. Now we get into the internalized drive. And so in humans, this is explained a lot as your early upbringing, what your parents kind of pushed you to do, etc., etc. But from a dog's point of view, I like to think of it as a genetic drive, so a predatory drive that the dog has, and a lot of early social development. So a dog's genetic drive, obviously, if you have a pointer dog, they're going to point at things. If you have a cattle dog, they're going to chase after and nip at things, right? These are the natural genetic drives in the dog. And then the early social development massively affects what the dog has learned to do or not to do as well, or whether they have a lot of confidence, whether they're lacking confidence, right? All of these are kind of internal drives in the dog, which makes them motivated to fulfill a natural drive. And then finally, we have what is referred to as the external / the social drive. And so this is obviously pressure that is coming from the outside. But it's also linked in a certain degree to the social interaction that the dog has. So an example of external pressure can be something that triggers the dog into a predatory state, or it can be something that makes them fearful, right? So if you have a dog that is scared of the vacuum cleaner, right, that will drive and motivate the dog from the outside of the dog to either run away or to try and fight it or to try and make it stop in one way, form, or shape, right? So now we have the three drives: biological, psychological, internalized, and then external / social. Now, this then further breaks down into what is referred to as the 3Ms model. And I mean M by oh God, I can't actually think of a word that's starting with M now. But let's get stuck into it because then it kind of makes sense until we get to the end. So this is a 3-step broken down model, which kind of explains all of what we have just talked about. So the 3 words that they use, right, keep in mind, it's called the 3Ms model. They use motivation, means, and environment. So not entirely sure how the environment fits into the 3Ms model, but scientists came up with this, so I'm not going to try and defend it or fight it in any way, form, or shape. But so the 3Ms model, obviously the motivation. What is the dog's inherent motivation to conduct a specific behavior? Then we have the means, which is also referred to as capacity. Does the dog have physical capacity to act on the motivated drive? And then finally, the environment is then also referred to as the opportunity. Does the dog actually have an opportunity to conduct the behavior? So I know this sounds very, very difficult to wrap your head around, but let's just do a super simple example. So let's talk about a Kelpie chasing a car, right? Which is a very common problem that we see a lot, right? Because herding dogs are highly triggered by motion. The motion activates them into a behavior, which is the means or the capacity of the dog. And then the environment, the opportunity, dictates whether or not the dog can actually follow through with that behavior. So if you were going to break this down properly, the dog has a natural motivation to chase things that moves fast. That is genetically hardwired into the dog because it's a herding dog. Now we start looking at, does the dog have the means to conduct the chasing behavior? So what I mean by that is the dog healthy? Right? A dog that has a broken leg is unlikely to pursue in high speed chasing because it hurts and because they are physically impaired. Right? So does the dog actually have the means, or what's also called the capacity, to conduct the behavior? Are they physically able to? And then finally, we have the environment. So the opportunity side of things. Does the environment around them actually allow for them to conduct that behavior? And in this case, if the dog is off leash, the dog is not tethered in any way, form, or shape, then yes, that environment allows for the dog to run after the car. So now we have the inherent drive, the motivation, we have the means, the dog is physically fit, and the environment has allowed the opportunity by not restraining the dog in any way, form, or shape. So the dog conducts chasing behavior going after a car. All right, now before you shake your head and headbutt the table because you're sitting listening to some random dog trainer idiot speaking into a microphone, you go, what is all of this super complicated scientific stuff got to do with this? I thought you were a bro science kind of guy and you just made shit up. Which I don't. I don't make things up, but I do like breaking things down. I find that the more I break things down, the more of a complete picture I have of what's happening around me. And so I do read a lot of scientific journals. I couldn't science anything, even if someone paid me to. But I do enjoy actually breaking things down and understanding it. And I think breaking down is a super important skill to have when you're working with a dog, because we have to look at every part of the dog. And if we have a problem behavior, like a lot of people will jump straight to, okay, well, we're just going to punish that problem behavior and it'll go away. And absolutely, the operant conditioning side of things can be highly effective on certain things. But very often, there are additional problems surrounding the behavior itself. And that's where we kind of need to look at the full picture and not just jump straight into saying, hey, we're taking this off the table. Now, that being said, obviously, repetition of a behavior is reliant on the result. right? So any behavior a dog conducts is going to produce one of three results. It's going to produce reinforcement, it's going to produce neutrality, meaning nothing happens, or it's going to result in a punishment. Now, all of those three affect whether or not the behavior will continue in the future. So, can we stop a behavior with punishment? In most cases, yes. But when we're talking about aggression, especially, or other problem behaviors, and we're talking like more ingrained problem behaviors, not puppies jumping on you, right? That can be very quickly stopped with a punishment followed by reinforcement for an alternative behavior. But when we are dealing with things like aggression, we are often also dealing with fear. We're dealing with anxiety. We're dealing with past learned behavior, or even developmental issues in the dog. So we kind of have to take a big step back and look at the big picture, because a cattle dog doing cattle dog things is not necessarily a problem. It can become a problem, obviously, because cattle dogs are very quick to nip and bite people, which is inappropriate. So now we have to find a way of dealing with that, right? But again, if we just go straight to heavy punishment, that can temporarily shut down the behavior, but very often a shut down behavior will come back if it's not dealt with in a more holistic way than just an operant way. I'm rambling a bit, but hopefully that makes sense. So this brings us into the next part of things, which is whenever we're dealing with any form of reactivity or aggression, what I tend to look for is whether this behavior is proactive or whether it's reactive. Because the treatment of proactive aggressive behavior versus reactive aggressive behavior can be very different. And it usually comes from a very different place in the dog's mind. So this is why it's important to understand what's happening and to look at all those little details of what the dog's breed is, what their early development is, what their confidence level is, their stress tolerance, because all of this affects the big picture, which is the behavior we need to deal with. All right, so proactive versus reactive aggression. Now, proactive and reactive aggression is also sometimes referred to as offensive aggression versus defensive aggression. And essentially, to break it down very simply, proactive aggression or offensive aggression is goal oriented. It has a very clear purpose and it is actively using aggressive behavior to try and achieve that purpose. So, the most common examples is domineering type behavior. So, dominance to avoid conflict, to to increase status in a hierarchy. We have territorial aggression, which is very purposeful. It's, get the hell off my lawn, essentially, like the old man side of things. We have resource guiding. Resource guiding is an interesting one because there are a few people, well, there was recently a famous trainer in America who announced that all resource guiding is fee-based because of those fearful of losing the resource, which is nonsense. There are dogs that are very competitively resource guiding, and these guys are not scared of losing something. They are actively going like, hey, get the fuck away from my thing. Do you want to fight over this? Do you want to fight? Do you reckon you're going to win? Right, and that's not fear, that's competition. But yeah, resource guiding is another one. And then finally, we have prey drive. So prey drive, and again, I think I talked about this in the last podcast, but we refer to this as predatory aggression. Now, obviously, a predator hunting isn't really aggressive. The reason why it's referred to as aggression is because it has intent to maim and harm. That's kind of where it comes from, but let's bring it back to just calling it prey drive instead. But prey drive is very intentful, It's I'm gonna run really fucking fast to decrease space between me and the prey so that I can bite the prey to kill it, to therefore consume it. Right, so that's the proactive or the offensive side of aggression. Now, on the reactive or the defensive side of aggression, we are delving more into fear. So fear is probably one of the more common forms of aggression that we tend to see. But it can also be from injury or illness, where the dog is physically hurting or in some way, form, or shape feeling out of sorts, and then they feel more vulnerable. Therefore, that can lead to aggressive behavior to try and control the environment around them. And then finally, we have, and this kind of interestingly fits into the fear-driven side of things as well, which is what we call learned behavior. So learned behavior is literally that the dog has conducted a particular behavior. It has found some form of reinforcement in the behavior. The dog has gone, this actually works. I'm going to continue practicing this behavior. And so a behavior pattern is now created, and the dog goes, all right, I'm going to continue on with this because it's working for me. Okay, so let's put a practical example to this, because hopefully that'll make it all make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to talk about, probably one of the most common fear-driven aggression that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, which is what some people call leash reactivity. Some people call it fear reactivity, frustration reactivity, whatever it may be. But essentially, you have a dog. When that dog's on the leash and it sees another dog, it lunges, it barks, it displays aggressive behavior. So let's put it down to that. Now, a dog that is displaying fear aggressive behavior, there can be a few reasons why they're displaying those behaviors. It can be poor genetics. If a dog has poor genetics, they are more prone to be nervy and unpredictable and more explosive, essentially. Bad genetics is the root of a lot of problems. Another thing can be the dog has had poor or incorrect socialization. Now, I'm not going to delve too deep into what socialization is here because I feel like that's a whole podcast in and of itself. But essentially, say you have a young puppy, you take that puppy to an off-leash dog park where there's a ton of other dogs because you think you have to socialize the dog, right? Which sounds like the dog should meet a ton of other dogs and interact with them. Whereas socialization really is to expose the dog to a bunch of different things and teach them, hey, this is not for you to worry about, right? You hang out with me and everything's going to be cool. But so now you put that puppy down in the dog park, you unclip the leash, and the puppy, it might show fear right then, right off the bat, right? If it's lacking some confidence, if it's lacking some stress tolerance, if it doesn't have the best genetics, the dog park might be very overwhelming for them, which is why, of course, we recommend that people do not ever take puppies to the dog park. But it might also be a happy-go-lucky little thing that just goes like, oh my God, dogs, I'm just going to bolt into this and start jumping on other dogs and have a good time. Now, at that point, what can happen is arousal levels can get too high. Right, so dogs are running around, they're jumping, they're playing, they're losing control, and suddenly a bigger dog bowls over this little puppy, like rushes into him. The puppy flies through the air, screaming in pain, right, because it's been hurt. Now, it wasn't it wasn't purposeful; it was accidental. But again, little things like that can actually set up puppies to have problems for life, which is another reason why we never say to take puppies or very young dogs into uncontrolled environments. But it can also be the puppy gets up in the face of a dog that doesn't tolerate it and actually snaps and even bites. If they don't have good bite inhibition, if they don't have a good understanding of social correction, a dog can overcorrect and actually bite a puppy, right? And so now we put the hurt on the puppy and the puppy goes, oh my God, other dogs are bad. I know this for a fact because one of them has hurt me. Now, if this happens during the very early critical development period of a puppy's life, this can become a lifelong problem. So just keep that in mind. Stay away from dog parks. Sit outside them and play with your puppy. Teach them to watch dogs, but ignore them. Much, much better. Now, again, I know this isn't exactly what we were talking about, but say I'm working with a fear reactive dog. So now this dog, for whatever reason, it doesn't like having other dogs around, especially not when it's on leash. Now, the leash is probably the biggest frustration driver in a dog, but also the thing that, if not properly understood by the dog, is the one thing that takes away all of their autonomy. And this will make more sense in a minute, but I'm out walking this dog. We are just going for a regular, sniffing exercise walk, just like everyone does with their dogs most days. Now, in the distance, my dog, or the dog that I'm walking, sees another dog. Now, it instantaneously locks onto that dog and it begins building stress. This is what we call the loading process. The dog is essentially loading up on various things inside of its body to prepare itself for a reaction. So what happens during a loading process is the body gets flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. It can be dopamine as well, depending on where this is coming from. But the dopamine side of things is more an excitement thing, which leads to a frustration thing. In a fear side, like in a fear case, it is usually cortisol that is filling the body, which is the stress hormone. So the dog goes, hey, there's a dog there. I'm not sure about this. I feel insecure about this. And the stress levels, the cortisol levels begin rising alongside with adrenaline. Now, all of this is preparing the dog for a big behavioral response. So as the space between the trigger dog and the dog that I'm working with decreases, the stress level increases. And now what you'll begin to see is actual physical changes in the fearful dog that we are working with. You'll see the body start to stiffen, right? So they start moving more robotically, almost like the shoulders are pumping up, and it's almost like their muscles are being filled with concrete. You will often see the mouth close, right? An open mouth with tongue hanging out is usually a relaxed mouth. A closed mouth is more of a tense one. Ears will, in some dogs, turn backwards and flatten. In some other dogs, they'll point forwards and almost pointing at the trigger. And what you'll also see is the tail changes. Now, the tail can tuck, but in very many cases, it is going to start going up into what we call a scorpion tail. So that kind of like inverted C shape, that is a very classic sign of a scorpion tail when they're getting ready to sting their prey. Now, at this point, the dog is in a high state of loading, and it is fixating on the trigger because it is essentially thinking, when do I react? At what point do I need to deal with this situation? Now, eventually, stress builds to a point where the cup overflows. And when the cup overflows, now the dog is going to go, all right, I have to activate into behavior because there's too much stress. Now, in this situation, the dog essentially has the 4 Fs to choose from, right? Now, in most fear cases, there is generally only 2 of them that we utilize, but I'll bring them all up. And so the 4 Fs is fight, flight, freeze, or friend. Friend is essentially appeasement. It is showing submissive behavior to go like, hey, I'm no threat, please don't do anything to me. Freeze is when the dog literally just panics and freezes and goes, I cannot move because I'm so scared, I don't know what to do. That does happen to some dogs, but it usually, even if it happens for a very short period of time. Because the dog is very quickly going to realize, especially if the trigger dog approaches them further to sniff them or interact with them, they are going to realize that the freeze response is not providing the relief of pressure that the dog needs. So at this point, we are left with two options, which is fight or flight. Now, evolution has always kind of pushed us in the direction of flight versus active aggression. So, like, imagine if you were a caveman running around in the wild before, when everything was fused together and didn't really know what was going on. If you repeatedly went up to stick your head in rustling bushes to try and start a fight, chances are you wouldn't survive for very long. And even if you were an excellent fighter and you won fight after fight after fight, at some point you would get injured. You would get a big scratch. You would, cop a bite, something like that. And because back in the days we didn't have antibiotics, tell me all about that. I'm just coming off a big fucking lot of antibiotics now because I got an infection. Highly unpleasant. But back in the days, an infection was a death sentence. So now all the active aggression that you have been displaying as this little caveman thing has actually brought you to the point of dying. Now, dying is the opposite of reproducing because you cannot produce more life now. So here we are. Your genes aren't being passed on, and therefore your overly aggressive demeanor is going to diminish. So, sorry, went on a ramble there. But what this comes back to is that the preferred method of resolving high levels of stress for most living things is to go into a state of flight. It is to run away, to create distance away from the thing that you feel threatened by in order to alleviate the pressure and create a negative reinforcement loop. However, what happens when I put a leash on a dog? Well, running away at this point is not really an option anymore. I have confined the dog. I have essentially cornered the dog. I've taken away my dog's autonomy, its opportunity to make decisions. Because I'm like, no, you're here with me on this 6-foot leash and you're not going anywhere, no matter what happens around. So at this point, I have left my dog with only one option, which is to fight. So now my dog, or the dog that I'm working with, switches gears and he goes, all right, the only way out of this is to fight, to drive the other thing away. Now, all that adrenaline, all of that cortisol that has been pumped into that dog's body now tenses all the muscles and it explodes. It lunges, it snaps, it barks, it spins on the leash. In some cases, it even redirects onto the owner, which is holding the leash. At this point, in the dog's mind, it is in a fight for its life. I don't feel safe. I can't get the trigger away by running away from it. So now I have to utilize aggressive behavior to drive the trigger away. Now, what do most people do if they're walking down the street with their dog and another dog lunges at them, snaps at them, bares its teeth at them? Well, they fuck off. Right? That's the proper Australian way of putting it, I think. They fuck right off. So they walk away. They go like, oh my God, your dog's so rude, blah, blah, blah. Right? As they're picking up little Fido and running in the opposite direction. Now, the aggression at this point has resolved the dog's problem, which is feeling fearful of the situation that it has been in. It has actively removed the trigger and made the dog feel better. It has produced what we call negative reinforcement by taking away the scary thing. Now, the behavior gets reinforced. So, Again, I keep coming. I'm probably going to come back to this for the rest of my fucking life. But okay, there's a difference between positive punishment, which is adding an aversive to stop a behavior from happening, and taking away an aversive to reinforce a dog's behavior. And that is what's happened here. The dog has not been punished in any way, form, or shape. It has utilized aggressive, high drive behavior to take away the thing that was freaking it out to begin with. Now, that relief, that sense of relief, that removal of stress becomes the reinforcement. So now the behavior gets reinforced and the dog gets pushed into what I call a behavioral loop. So now the dog goes, hey, I was freaked out before. I displayed aggressive behavior. That got rid of the thing that freaked me out. Therefore, the aggression worked. Now the dog begins practicing the behavior. So the next time he sees a dog, the loading process begins exactly the same. Adrenaline gets pumped into the body, same as cortisol, the muscles tense, the mouth closes, the eyes fixate, ears go forwards or backwards, depending on the type of dog that it is, and the tail hits a scorpion tail. And now the dog explodes from 5 meters away. The day before, it might have been when the other dog was 3 meters away. Now it becomes 5 meters. The dog is driven away. My dog feels safe again. The aggression gets reinforced and the behavioral loop continues. Now we're trapped. And this is why when people come to me, they say the aggression happened out of nowhere. Well, it never really does that because we can usually predict when it happens, unless the dog has some seriously big genetic issues, right? But most people miss the signs. They miss the appeasement sign. They miss the sniffing off the ground. They miss the turning off the back. They miss the little baring off the teeth, which is telling the other dog, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Get the hell away from me or I will escalate my behavior, right? Now the dog continues to practice this behavior day in and day out. Every single dog it walks past, it lunges and barks and screams from further and further away. And what happens over time is that the fear actively becomes replaced through classical conditioning with the aggression. A lot of fear aggressive dogs that I've met in my life, by the time I meet them, they're not even fearful anymore. They are just aggressive. They go, hey, this is working. I'm just continuing this behavioral cycle, right? Because this is working for me. Now we have a big problem and we have to start working through it. Now, at this point, it is very important for me to point this out. Negative reinforcement is way more powerful than positive reinforcement. This is something that a lot of people will try and pull the wool over your eyes and say, like, no, you can do anything with positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is just as good as any form of negative reinforcement or punishment. It's not. It is absolutely not. It's not even fucking close. All right, close your eyes and picture this. You're in the room with two people. One of them has your favorite thing, whether that is your favorite meal, your favorite drink, your favorite whatever. And the other one has a gun. Now, one person points a gun at your head and the other one offers you your absolute most favorite thing in the world. What are you going to focus on? I'm pretty sure 100% of people are going to focus on the gun and not give a fuck about the positive reinforcement that's being offered to them. So when I say that, especially when dealing with fear, anxiety, and these kinds of things, negative reinforcement is way more powerful than positive reinforcement and is always going to win. This is why throwing treats on the ground is never going to fix the problem. Sure, it can temporarily distract the dog if you caught them at the right time, but it's never going to make things better because the dog is actively negatively reinforcing itself by being aggressive. And that's the operancy of the behavior. That's why the aggression increases. That's why the problem gets bigger. That's when people give up, or they just go, hey, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to fix this. We don't know how to make this better. You need to help us. This kind of stuff pushes people to the brink. I have unfortunately seen it a lot of times. I've been in many houses where people are crying the second I walk in because they're like, we can't live with this dog anymore. And it's all because the behavioral cycle is never interrupted. It is never helped in any way, form, or shape. So the dog keeps helping itself. That's really, really important to understand. Now, the vast majority of reactivity and aggression that I see has been accidentally reinforced. It has been, again, someone gets a dog from a shelter. The dog seems friendly enough. They take it for a walk. They don't stay home for long enough to build a relationship. They have no background information on the dog. They clip them on the harness, so they have no control over the dog. The dog gets overstimulated, starts pulling, sees another dog, freaks out, react. And a behavioral cycle has at that point either been created. It might have been created before. Again, that a lot of dogs end up in shelters because they have behavioral issues, right? So this might have been there all along. But chances are it happened in a similar fashion when it began. So now every walk becomes a nightmare for the human because they are stressed, anxious, they're freaking out. They are grabbing the leash with two hands every time they see another dog, preparing for a blow up. And in the process, also preparing the dog for blowing up because that's the only thing that the dog understands. So now we are trapped in this endless behavioral loop, which just gets worse and worse. And it bleeds into other things as well. I can't even count how many dogs I've met that it started with some fear reactivity on leash, right? So they would lunge at another dog or whatever they were fearful of, and they practice that behavior to become really good at it, right? Anything you practice, you become good at. Now, suddenly they start displaying aggressive behavior towards people in the house because they're like, well, this is the only thing that I can find that's working. Right. And so even like they might have shown appeasement behavior in the house before, and someone comes to the house, the dog freaks out a little bit. They go like, oh, but I kind of like people. So what if I like just gently walk up to you and turn my butt to you? Right. And then they go like, oh, cool. Well, they kind of pet me. I'm still a bit stressed, but it feels okay. Right. But when the operant aggression goes on for too long, now it can start bleeding in all kinds of directions. So now suddenly the dog goes like, you know what? You're in my house and I'm not happy about this. I'm not offering my bum for a scratch. I'm going to offer you my teeth to see if you'll leave. And this is why it's so incredibly important to get on top of this. And the sooner you get on top of it, the easier it'll be to turn around in most cases. Now, there are some dogs, again, genetic aggression, experiences as puppies that have been so bad. Like some dogs cannot be turned around, but the absolute vast majority can. And this is why it's so important to get on top of it, like I said, as quickly as possible. So now, hopefully, we have a little bit of an understanding of how operancy and actual behavior changes can lead to a dog becoming aggressive. All right, but up until now, we've talked about the kind of maladaptive side of things, where we have leash reactivity, where we have undesirable aggression. How do we make a dog aggressive intentionally? Well, it's the exact same way. We respond in a way to the dog's behavior that makes them feel good, right? This is literally how you train like military and police dogs, or even sporting dogs that do bite work and that kind of stuff. Right? We have these little puppies, and they're Malinois, right? They are German Shepherds. They are some bull breeds, Dobermans, Rottweilers, right? These dogs that are kind of bred to be a little bit more protective. And so they have a naturally higher level of aggression. But instead of trying to suppress and control that aggression, we try and bring it out of them intentionally. And we show them, hey, your aggression can actually change the behavior around you. Right? So say if you have I don't know, top of my head, say you have a 12-week-old Malinois puppy and you bring out a decoy. So for those who don't know, a decoy is one of the people wearing the suit that gets bitten intentionally by a dog to kind of teach them how to bite properly, to develop their confidence and do all of this. So now we have this little 12-week-old puppy. We have them on a harness, right? Because that tends to agitate them and make them more frustrated because they're pulling with their whole body. Now this guy comes out, he might have a little stick that he's waving around and he's holding up a sleeve like what looks like a toy for the puppy to bite. Now the puppy then arcs up and starts barking, starts displaying actual aggressive behavior. Now, at this point, a good decoy will have to react. So at this point, the dog isn't reactive to the stimuli that's happening around. They're trying to actively use aggression to make the stimuli itself react. So now that person the decoy, might squeal, right? They might shake. They might become flinchy. They want to try and look helpless. They want to try and look scared. And the more scared they look, the more the puppy goes, oh my God, I've got you. Right? So now they double down on their barking and their lunging and they're baring their teeth. And as they're displaying all of these behaviors, the decoy begins slowly walking towards the puppy while, squealing and looking fearful and pretending that the puppy is overpowering them. And eventually they get close enough so the puppy gets their most favorite positive reinforcement, which is to bite the sleeve. So they latch onto the sleeve. The decoy screams and falls down, and the puppy crawls over them and goes, I'm the most powerful dog on the planet. That is literally how we teach them to start using aggression actively towards people. Right? And so now the dog is fully in control of the environment around it simply by displaying natural aggressive behavior. That's how we actively try and put some control on this and try and put it into a system, I guess, for lack of a better word, where we don't end up with maladaptive aggression, because the dog doesn't just end up being fearful and aggressive to everything around it, because it goes like, hey, there are certain scenarios, certain situations where the aggression can be put on command. Right? We can ask the dog to schutz, which is what I use with Agnes. When I say schutz, that means protect in German. That means run up to the person I'm pointing at and bark in their face, right? And so now we have a whole different level of controlled aggression, which I touched on briefly in the last episode. But this is how we give dogs biological fulfillment. This is how we give them outlets. This is how we tell them, hey, I'm not going to make you pretend to be a couch potato for the rest of your life because I know you're not based on the dog that you are. But we need to have some breaks. We need to have some control on this, right? So it's the exact same process. It's an operant process where the aggression changes the environment. Just in one situation, it is out of our control and out of our hands. Whereas in the developing aggression side of things, it's actually fully within our control. And we can steer it. We can push the dog in the right direction. And now you have a dog that understands the picture, that goes, hey, I get to be aggressive from time to time, which is something that I enjoy doing. And I enjoy fighting decoys and I enjoy winning because that's the kind of dog that I am. But that is also very different from the fearful dog that pulls on the leash and pants and is anxious around the house and snaps and lunges and barks, right? That's the thing that we don't want. But the operancy of the aggression, the purpose of it all, the understanding of it is all the same. That's what I'm trying to get at here. All right. So hopefully all of the pieces are starting to fall into place a little bit more now, and you can actually see how utilizing aggression actively can make a dog feel safe, can make them feel like they're controlling the world around them, and can literally take away their fear. But it can also make them feel incredibly strong and powerful in other settings where we want the dog to be aggressive, right? And so there is a lot going on with this, but I guess at the end of the day, the most important thing is just to understand that if the dog is finding any form of relief or reinforcement in the behavior it's conducting, that behavior is going to continue. And that is why so much aggression and reactivity ends up just getting stuck. People get stuck in it and they never make any progress and they go, we've tried everything. To be fair, in most cases, they've very rarely tried anything. But now we are at a point where you need a professional to help you to start working through all of this. Now, I'm not going to go specifically into behavior modification here because I have already been rambling on for, I think, close to 15 minutes now. But I do want to finish up by talking about an interesting concept when it comes to dealing with aggression, and that is to essentially the functionality of taking away the power of aggression. So that's a very complicated sentence, and I probably could have said that better. But basically, how can I show the dog, hey, your aggression doesn't work anymore? And will that have an effect on the dog? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Because again, the only reason why a behavior persists is because the dog's finding reinforcement in it. If you have a dog that's been exhibiting very successfully high levels of aggression for long periods of time, meeting that aggression with punishment can actually escalate things. That is not to say that it always happens, which is the perpetual bullshit that you'll hear online. If you ever punish a dog, you automatically make them aggressive. Not at all. But if the dog has a long-standing history of the aggression being useful, if you then try to come back at the dog with active physical pressure, then yes, that can escalate the problem. And so this is where, how do we turn that around? Well, how about I or someone else, we put ourselves in a position where the dog gets to exhibit the aggressive behavior, but gets nothing out of it. And this is where we come into talking about using things like protective bite suit gear. So I actually had a client recently, which I want to tell this story just to finish everything up, because I think it was a perfect example of how this works and how effective it actually was. So I've changed names and stuff around here because I I'm just trying to keep this neutral. But essentially, I was called by a rescue group who said they had a livestock guardian breed, so literally a dog that's bred to protect territory and livestock where it is. That was in this rescue group, and they were having issues with it. So let's just we'll call the dog Maddie, right? Maddie seems like a cool name for a livestock guardian. Now, after having had a Zoom consult and a chat with the foster care at the time, so essentially the dog was in foster care. He was excellent with the foster carer, who's a highly experienced dog handler, has a really good understanding of a lot of positive reinforcement-based training, etc., and had made really big progress with the dog. But what happened was this dog had some poor genetics. From memory, he was around 3 or 4 years old. I can't remember exactly, but he was still quite young. And again, like with a lot of rescues, you don't really know what's happened to them before. You don't know much about their prior training, etc., etc. So we're guessing a lot when it comes to working with rescue dogs. But essentially, this foster carer had decided that he was going to keep this dog because he'd built a really good bond with him, and so the dog was never going to get adopted out, but he had been showing increasingly aggressive behavior towards people coming onto the property, and he had nipped 3 people. And the nips had been fairly gentle, so a little bit of bruising, that's kind of it. Like, no one had to go to the hospital or anything. But essentially, what this person said to me is, I think if someone just walked onto the property who weren't managed by me, who didn't understand how to read dogs, if they just walked in, they would get attacked properly. Like, they would get properly injured. That was the guy's biggest issue. And essentially, what he wanted to know was whether or not the dog had to be euthanized, because he thought the dog was dangerous. So he wanted to keep the dog, but he also said, like, hey, I'm not going to be irresponsible. I'm not going to have a dangerous dog on my property because it's going to affect my life. It's going to put other people at risk, right? So he's an incredibly sensible, fantastic human being. Now, how do we deal with this? Well, really, there is only one way, and that is to find out what the dog's intentions are. So I loaded up the car. I went for a nearly hour-long drive to go and see this guy. We met up. Maddie was behind. He was in a big run, and second he saw me, he started barking. Right, perfectly normal type stuff. We had a little bit of a chat, and then I said, let's get to work. Right, let's just make it easy. Let's find out what this dog is actually made of, and find out whether or not he's actually dangerous, and find out what we can do with him. So I suited up. I put on a bite-proof suit, which they use in sports and that kind of stuff. And I played the village idiot, right? I had to take on this role of this guy who does not understand anything about dogs, that is going to actively put himself in a dangerous position because he doesn't understand what's happening, to be the kind of person that goes like, oh my God, all dogs love me, it's fine. Whereas, the person holding a leash is screaming like, get away, he will bite you. Those people exist. And if I'm actually going to find out what the dog's made of and whether or not he's dangerous, I have to become that guy. So I suit up, and these suits are hot, right? And it was 43 degrees Celsius. I was melting, but I'm like, all right, cool. Just drink as much water as possible and try not to pass out, because I wouldn't want this guy to bite my face because he's quite a big boy. But essentially, I put the suit on. I walked up to the run that he was in, and he throws himself at the gate, like face first, teeth fully bared, barking in my face. And I unlatch, I push the door open, he gets pushed back, and I step in, making sure he doesn't get out. And he immediately nips the leg off my suit. But it was a very soft nip. It was literally just a front tooth nip, and then he backed away barking. Now that tells me a lot, because that tells me he doesn't actually have any active intention to injure or hurt me. He's not attacking me. He's going, hey, I need to get you out of here because I'm not comfortable with this situation. Anyway, we stayed in there. The dog, he came up, he ran up to me and barked in my face a couple of times. He nipped me one more time, just on the leg. But again, no bite, right? Just barely touching. So the foster care and now owner came in to the run, and the dog just kind of walked up and sat beside him, looking at me, just unsure. The owner said that, hey, this run he's a little bit protective of, but there's a more problematic area further up where he's super territorial. I'm like, all right, cool. Put the dog on a leash. They went out before me. I followed suit after. Followed suit. Weird thing to say. But anyway, so I follow after them. He takes this dog into this smaller penned area, which was kind of his area, as the owner was saying. And the second that gate latch, the dog turned and threw himself at the fence, like barking, getting up in my face immediately. And I'm like, all right, cool. Maybe this is the place where this all happened. So I walked up to the gate. I opened the gate. I slid my leg in, making sure to not let him get out. And yeah, I just walked in like a moron. Now, what happened was the dog nipped me again, barely touching with his front teeth, right? Not going for me, not like actually trying to hurt me or like, hey, I need to get you the fuck out of here kind of thing. He was just going like, nah, I can't have you in here because it's freaking me out. And I think, and like the important thing here to understand, and what a lot of people misunderstand here, is I was not trying to provoke the dog. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't flailing my arms. I did nothing. I just walked through a gate, shut the gate, and I just stood there like a statue. Right? The people who have issues with these kind of tests, they're the people who go, oh, you're actively antagonizing the dog to try and bite you. And like, no, this dog already bites. We know that. What I want to do is like, if I walk in completely non-confrontational because I feel safe and I know the dog can't really injure me, what will the dog do? That is not agitation. That is information. Now, by the end of the session, what happened is I ended up hanging out in this pen with the dog and was just chatting to the owner. The dog was just walking around drinking water. He would occasionally like look at me and bark twice and then walk away again. But that was kind of it. The dog just gave up. Now, what we did do is we put an electric collar on the car. It's on the car. We put an electric collar on the dog. And I came through the gate again. And I said to the guy, hey, I don't want you to put it at a very high level. We put it at, I believe, a level 30 out of 100, which is very noticeable, but it's not painful. And I said, when he rushes me, so I'm just going to walk through the gate completely neutral again. When he rushes up to me, the second he gets close and tries to nip me or gets like right up to bark in my face, I want you to stimulate him on the electric collar. We did. I walked through the gate. The dog came rushing down. He barked once. He got one stimulation on a level 30. And then I just stood there. Now, what happened next was the dog walked up to the owner. He walked back down to me. He sniffed me. And then he lay down at my feet, completely relaxed. So, what does that tell us? Well, I didn't come in with the intention to fight the dog, right? You see a lot of people who are very stuck in an operant mindset who go like, hey, we're just going to lay into this dog until it stops being aggressive. The problem is that doesn't deal with the underlying issue. Now, was this dog completely comfortable with me after all of this? No, absolutely not. But he felt no need to display aggressive behavior towards me afterwards. And again, the reason why we kind of just had to, we couldn't really do much training because this person who is now his owner, he had people coming to stay for Christmas. We had a week to essentially find out whether these people were going to be safe or not, right? So we just walked in, we're like, hey, let's see what the dog does. And I got an update from him not long ago, and the dog's in the house with him. He's sitting on his bed. He gets a little bit unsure at times, but he hasn't rushed him. He hasn't nipped him. He hasn't done anything. So at that point, what we did was we allowed the dog to express who he is, to show us who he is, what his real intentions were. And I gave no feedback. So when he nipped me, I didn't make a sound. I didn't pull my arms back. I didn't try to get out, right? I just stood there like a statue. And the dog went, hey, this shit's not working anymore. Why is it not working? Right?
And then he tried a couple more times because he is trapped in this state of mind of like, hey, this has worked in the past. I have to keep rinsing and repeating. And eventually we get to again, I think the entire session, which went for about 2 hours, he nipped me 5 times. But by the last one, we gave him a little bit of feedback. Hey, actually, this isn't going to work out for you anymore. And the dog just completely relaxed. So what we did at that point, again, took away that kind of false sense of security that the dog was giving himself by being aggressive, but also showing the dog, hey, I am not someone to be aggressive towards. I am no threat to you. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to injure you. I'm not here to fight you. I am just the village idiot that steps in and says hi because I love dogs too much. That's it. And the dog learned. It is an incredibly powerful way of approaching dogs like these that are just so trapped in their own mind, and they're so stressed and they're so anxious, and they go, this is the only thing I know how to do. And that's the in my opinion, probably one of the most gentle ways of showing them, hey, I'm not your enemy. I am, in fact, your friend, and you don't have to worry about me. But yeah, it was super cool. And I hope to meet this dog again. Hope to do some more work with him. But yeah, it's operancy and aggression. Behavior begets results. Behavior begets consequences that are undesirable. All of this affects how the dog approaches the aggressive behavior in the future. And again, the sooner you get on top of this, the less practice the dog has, the easier it's going to be to deal with, the less chance of injury is going to happen along the way. And don't wait. If you have issues with your dog, get help. Get it done. Because in most cases, it can be helped so much in a very short period of time if the behavior is new. All right. I think that's all for me for this episode. Again, I hope this has been helpful. I hope all of this kind of helps make a little bit more sense of why dogs do what they do and why they behave in certain ways and why the behavior sticks around. Because again, if we don't understand all of this, it's going to be very hard to actually learn how to work through it and to rehabilitate these behaviors. And hope it was helpful. In any way, thank you for listening to another episode of Beastly Talks. I'm your host, Stian Helling, and it is really hot and I'm really tired. And do you know what you should do right now? Take a wild guess. That's right. Go train your dog. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Beastly Talks. I hope you found it interesting and that you'll join me for the next one as well. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it so that more people can hear about it. Or if you think this particular episode would benefit a family member, friend or colleague, be sure to share it with them directly. You can follow me on social media at Viking Dog Trainer on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube. Thank you for your support and keep training your dog.